Isabella Monroe snatched the badge off his chest herself. Didn't ask security to do it. Didn't wait. She stepped forward, grabbed the laminated card with 2 fingers like it was something contaminated, and dropped it on the floor between them. "You're done," she said. "Walk out or I call the police." 40 people watched. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. And then Caleb Ryan looked down at his badge on the floor, his name face up staring back at him, and made the hardest decision of his life. He bent down, picked it up, and handed it to her directly. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "And not the one you think." She didn't answer. She was already walking away. What she didn't know, what nobody in that building knew, would shut down the entire company before sundown. What city are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button. You're going to want to be here for every single part of this. The badge hit the floor at 6:44 a.m. By 6:46, Caleb Ryan was in the elevator. By 6:47, he was in the parking lot gym bag over one shoulder, 11 months of invisible labor behind him, and a 6-year-old daughter with a heart condition waiting at home, along with the health insurance he'd just lost, in under 90 seconds. He sat in his car and did not start the engine for a long time. Let's go back, because what happened that morning didn't start with a badge or a folder or a camera flag. It started 2 years earlier in a kitchen on a Tuesday, with the sound of something falling that Caleb Ryan still couldn't fully describe to anyone who asked, not because he didn't remember it, but because there were no words built for that particular sound. The sound of your entire life-changing direction without your permission. March 3rd. Dana didn't wake up. Aneurysm. No warning. No symptoms. One moment she was asleep in the bed they'd shared for 9 years. The next, she was gone completely, irreversibly gone, while Caleb stood in the kitchen making coffee, and Lily watched cartoons in the living room, too young to understand why her father had dropped his mug and started screaming her mother's name. Bane. The grief was its own country. A place he'd had to live in while simultaneously raising a child, managing medical appointments, and figuring out how to keep the lights on. Lily had her mother's dark eyes. She also had what her cardiologist, a careful man named Dr. Reyes, called a manageable but monitored congenital heart defect, a structural irregularity that required quarterly echocardiograms, a daily beta blocker, and the kind of consistent specialist access that cost money even with good insurance, and destroyed you financially without it. Again, Caleb had been a senior mechanical design engineer at Marston Defense Systems. Good salary. Federal benefits. A career trajectory that had included 2 patents and aerospace certification, and a team of 12 people who reported to him. He'd had to walk away from all of it. Not fired, not laid off, just incompatible. Marston needed 60-hour weeks, last-minute travel, and total availability for priority contracts. A widowed father with a medically fragile first grader and no family within 400 miles did not fit that model. His manager Holt had sat across from him in a conference room and looked genuinely pained. "We'd hate to lose you, Caleb, but this position doesn't bend." 3 months of applications after that. Every role that matched his qualifications demanded the same thing, full availability. No exceptions. Your personal life is your problem. He found nothing, so he did what he had to do. Avum Technologies. Night custodial shift. $23.40 an hour. Health insurance after 60 days. First shift ending at 7 a.m., which meant he could be home before Lily left for school. His neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, a 71-year-old retired teacher who had loved Dana like a daughter, staying with Lily each night until he returned. It was not the life he'd planned. It was the life his daughter needed him to survive. He'd noticed the problem on his 43rd night. Not looking for it, not expecting it. He'd been working the Eastern Corridor, emptying waste bins along workstation row C, where the thermal systems team sat, when he glanced at a monitor left running on simulation playback. His eyes moved across the schematic automatically, the way you read your native language without deciding to. The way a surgeon's hands know what they're touching before the brain finishes the sentence. He saw it immediately. Thermal joint assembly. Primary load plate connecting to the stress distribution manifold. Two dissimilar metals, titanium mounting bracket interfacing directly with an aluminum load rail with no compliant buffer layer between them. His stomach dropped. At room temperature, the simulation would run perfectly. Clean numbers, clean outputs, every metric inside tolerance. Joe. At operating temperature, real-world thermal load, sustained field conditions, those two metals would expand at different rates. Titanium holds. Aluminum pushes. The joint accumulates stress invisibly below every standard test threshold until the fatigue limit is exceeded and the whole system fails in the field. Not in a test, not in a simulation. Out there after launch in the hands of whoever bought and trusted this product. He stood between the workstations with a trash liner in his hand and felt the specific nauseating weight of knowing something critical that no one would believe coming from him. He thought about saying something. He actually rehearsed it. Standing there in the dark, quiet floor at 2 a.m., he ran the words in his head. "Excuse me, I noticed something in the thermal joint spec. There may be a dissimilar metals issue you'll want to verify." He imagined the face of whoever turned around. The slow scan from his face down to his uniform back up. The pause. The particular quality of silence that comes right before someone decides you're not worth taking seriously. He'd had that experience once already. Early on, 3 months into the job, he'd spotted an HVAC duct routing error that would have caused condensation damage to the server room infrastructure. He'd mentioned it carefully and politely to the facilities manager on duty. The facilities manager had stared at him, then called his supervisor to report that custodial staff was interfering with engineering matters. Caleb had received a formal written warning. So this time he said nothing. He finished the bin route. He mopped the corridor. He told himself the engineers would catch it. He told himself they had test protocols, review cycles, quality checks, that an elite technical team building a flagship product would not miss something this fundamental. He almost believed it. The morning of October 14th started like every other morning. He arrived at 5:47, signed in, retrieved his equipment cart from the supply room, started the Eastern Corridor sweep working west. By 6:10, he was on the drafting station row. 2 people were in early Priya, a systems engineer who always had earbuds in before she sat down, and Trent, a senior guy, who drank his coffee standing up every morning like it was a personal philosophy. Neither of them acknowledged Caleb. This was normal. In 11 months, no engineer on this floor had initiated a conversation with him. They moved around him in the hallways the way water moves around a stationary object automatically without friction, without recognition. He was running the floor sweeper past the drafting cluster when he saw the folder. Physical. Manila style, thick with printed schematics and lying open face down on the floor, apparently slid off the edge of a desk. The tab was labeled in red, Confidential AVUM Internal Classification Tier 1. He bent down and picked it up. He placed it on the desk. He moved on. Total elapsed time 11 seconds. He knew that later because the upgraded security system, the 4K camera network, Isabella Monroe had personally greenlit 6 weeks earlier, logged every second of it, and flagged the contact automatically against the building's restricted materials protocol. The flag was in Isabella Monroe's dashboard before he reached the next workstation. He heard her before he saw her. The elevator opened at 6:42, and Isabella Monroe came out like a pressure system that had decided to become specific. She was 41. Fit. A haircut that cost more than Caleb's weekly take-home. She moved through the building with the body language of someone who had decided a long time ago that hesitation was for people who weren't sure they were right, and Isabella Monroe was always sure. She had built a VUM from 11 people and a seed round into a 340-person technology firm over 8 years. She had done it through genuine intelligence, relentless drive, and an absolute zero-tolerance policy for anything she categorized as a threat to the company, to the launch, to the control she'd worked every day of those 8 years to maintain. She was looking at him before she'd fully cleared the elevator. She didn't slow down. She stopped 4 feet in front of him, close enough that this was clearly intentional. "You picked up a classified schematic folder this morning," she said. Still quiet. That was worse than loud. Loud means someone wants a reaction. Quiet means someone has already decided. "You had your hands on Tier 1 restricted engineering documents." "It was on the floor," Caleb said. "I put it back on the desk." "You held it for 11 seconds. I walked 6 feet. It's classified." The volume moved up on the last word like a door opening. Priya pulled out one earbud. Trent turned around. 3 other engineers who had filtered in during the last hour looked up from monitors. "Custodial staff does not touch classified materials. That's not a gray area. That's a signed agreement you accepted when you took this job." "I picked up something that had fallen on the floor," Caleb said. His voice stayed level. He had learned slowly and at real cost that calm in the face of someone else's certainty was the only dignified position available to him. "I didn't open it. I didn't read it. I returned it to the desk. That's all that happened." The camera saw differently. "The camera saw me walk 6 feet. Her eyes moved over him the way people's eyes sometimes do when they're not actually looking at a person, when they've already placed you in a category, and what they're seeing now is just the category confirming itself. Uniform, mop handle, badge, custodial staff. Done." "Marcus," she said. The head of building security materialized from near the elevator. Thick-necked professional, visibly uncomfortable. He'd worked with custodial staff long enough to know the difference between a threat and a man who picked up a folder. "Process him out," Isabella said. "Badge access card personal effects, effective immediately." "Ms. Monroe," Marcus started. "Today, Marcus." Caleb looked at her directly. "I need this job," he said. Not pleading, stating. The way an engineer states a load limit, not because he wants to argue, but because the number is real and ignoring it has consequences. "My daughter has a heart condition. This insurance." "That's not Avium's concern." She said it clean. No hesitation, no flicker. "You violated protocol. This conversation is over." She turned and walked toward her office. Caleb looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the floor. Then Caleb did the thing that nobody in that room expected. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He looked at the floor where his badge had landed. She'd pulled it off herself. Those 2 fingers, that deliberate drop. And he bent down and picked it up. He held it out toward her retreating back. "You're making a mistake," he said loud enough to carry. "And not the one you think you are." She didn't turn around. He set the badge on the nearest desk, quietly, and walked to the elevator. Marcus walked him through the process without speaking. Personal locker, gym bag, the photograph of Lily he kept taped inside the locker door. Her school picture from last spring, gap-toothed smile, the Blues Clues shirt she'd refused to let Dana throw away even when she outgrew it. He folded the photograph and put it in his shirt pocket. Marcus walked him to the service elevator. Loading dock, side door to the parking lot. "Sorry, man," Marcus said. Quietly, sincerely. The door closed. Caleb stood in the gray October parking lot gym bag on his shoulder and did the math. Insurance lapsed at end of month. Lily's next cardiology appointment was in 3 weeks. The beta blocker prescription renewed in 11 days. The echocardiogram Dr. Reyes had scheduled for November, the one that would determine whether the mild progression they'd noted in September required intervention, cost $1,400 out of pocket without coverage. He was not a man given to panic. He was an engineer. He thought in systems and cause and effect, in what the actual variables were, and what the realistic solutions looked like. He thought about those things now, methodically standing in a parking lot at 6:51 in the morning. Then he thought about the thermal joint,
Did you go on?
the titanium bracket, the aluminum rail, the missing compliant layer, the stress that was accumulating invisibly in a system that 40 engineers believed was perfect because the simulation said so, and because nobody had looked at it through the eyes of someone who'd built load systems in aerospace environments where that specific failure mode had a name and a history and a body count attached to it. He thought about whether to call someone, anonymous tip, professional channel, former colleague who still had contacts. He decided against it. Not bitterness, not revenge withheld, just the simple calculation of a man with limited bandwidth and a 6-year-old who needed him functional. Avam's problems were Avam's problems. He had enough of his own. He got in his car. He called Mrs. Peterson, told her he was coming home early, didn't explain why. He started the engine. He drove home through the October gray, and he did not think about Avam Technologies again for exactly 7 hours and 23 minutes. That was how long it took for the calls to start. At 2:17 p.m., the primary simulation for the Avium flagship load system failed. Yeah, not a software error, not a power interruption, a structural failure in the thermal joint assembly, the exact location, the exact mechanism, the exact progression that Caleb Ryan had seen on a monitor screen at 2 a.m. 43 nights ago with a trash liner in his hand, and the particular cold clarity of a man who recognizes a catastrophe and has no platform from which to say so. The engineering team ran it again. Failed again. Again. By 4 p.m., the floor was in controlled panic, the kind where people speak in low, fast voices and nobody makes eye contact. By 5 p.m., Isabella Monroe was standing in the middle of the engineering floor, asking questions that nobody could answer. By 6 p.m., they had traced the failure back to its source and were staring at a two-metal interface without a compliant buffer layer, and the lead thermal engineer, a meticulous, brilliant man named Singh, who did not make this type of mistake, was holding a printout and saying very quietly, "This should have been caught in review." Nobody said the other thing. The thing that was in the room anyway, unspoken, sitting in the space between all of them. The janitor. The man in the uniform who had said you're making a mistake and not the one you think, and then walked into the elevator and out of the building before anyone had processed what that meant. Isabella Monroe stood at the window of her office at 6:34 p.m. looking at the city and felt something she was not accustomed to feeling. She pulled up the security footage from that morning. She watched it. All 11 seconds of it. A man picking up a folder from the floor, walking 6 feet, setting it on a desk. Then she pulled up his employee file. Caleb Ryan, custodial, 11 months. No disciplinary history before this morning. And then, because she was under everything, a thorough person, she went deeper. Prior employment. The name Marston Defense Systems appeared. Then a job title. Then a list of credentials that made her read the page twice. She sat down slowly. Then she picked up the phone. Caleb's phone rang at 7:02 p.m. He was sitting on the edge of Lily's bed. She was asleep. She went down early on her medication days, and he'd been sitting there in the dark for a while watching her breathe, doing the thing that single parents do when the world has been difficult and the one reliable thing left is the specific rise and fall of a child's chest. He looked at the number. Avam Technologies, mainline. He let it ring. It rang again at 7:09, then 7:14. At 7:21 he answered. "Mr. Ryan," Isabella Monroe's voice. Different than that morning. The certainty was still there. She wasn't a woman who lost that easily, but something underneath it had shifted. Something had cracked slightly in the structure of how she spoke to him. "I need you to come in." Caleb said nothing for a moment. "The system failed," he said. Not a question. A pause on her end that told him everything. "We have a critical Thermal joint, he said. Dissimilar metals. No compliant buffer layer. Titanium bracket aluminum rail. It's been accumulating stress since the first thermal cycle test. Every simulation you've run at operating temperature has been slowly expanding that failure window. He kept his voice completely flat. You know that now. Another pause. Longer. How did you? She started. I saw it on a monitor 43 nights ago, Caleb said, while I was emptying your trash. And the silence on the other end of the line had a particular quality to it. The specific silence of a person who has just been handed information that requires them to restructure something they were very confident about. I need you to come in, she said again. The voice had changed again. Something had left it. Something that in someone else, Caleb might have called pride. Please. He looked at Lily sleeping. He thought about the insurance, the cardiologist, the echocardiogram in November, the beta blocker renewal in 11 days. He thought about a badge dropped on a floor like it was garbage. 2 fingers. A deliberate release. My daughter has an appointment tomorrow morning, he said. I'll come in after. Isabella Monroe said, okay. He hung up. He sat in the dark with his daughter breathing steadily beside him, and he thought about what it cost a person to say a single word like that. Okay. From a position like hers to a person like him after a morning like this one. He wasn't sure what it cost her. He knew what it had cost him. He turned off the lamp and stayed there a while longer in the dark, listening to Lily breathe while across the city, 40 engineers sat in a building that suddenly couldn't function without the man they'd watched walk out of it that morning. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments right now. Let's see how far this story has traveled. Subscribe if you haven't and stay with me. Because what Caleb finds when he walks back into that building tomorrow is going to change everything. He drove to the hospital at 7:58 the next morning with Lily in the back seat, wearing her yellow rain jacket. The one with the broken zipper she refused to let him replace, because she said broken zippers were more interesting than working ones. She was eating a granola bar and asking him why clouds didn't fall down, and Caleb answered her the way he always did, fully seriously, the way you answer someone whose questions actually deserve real answers. And by the time he pulled into the children's medical parking structure, they'd covered water vapor atmospheric pressure and the difference between cumulus and cumulonimbus. And Lily had decided she wanted to be a meteorologist when she grew up, or possibly a dog trainer. She hadn't fully decided yet. He held her hand walking in. That was the thing people didn't see when they looked at Caleb Ryan. They saw the uniform, or the gym bag, or the quiet face of a man who didn't argue back when he should have. They didn't see this the way he held his daughter's hand in parking structures and hospital lobbies, fingers wrapped around hers, with the particular grip of a parent who has sat in too many waiting rooms and learned the hard way that you don't take the small moments for granted because they are not in fact small. Dr. Reyes saw them at 8:45. He was a careful man, the kind of doctor who looked at you directly when he spoke and never reached for the comfortable lie when the complicated truth was more useful. He'd been Lily's cardiologist for 14 months. He knew Caleb's situation. He knew about Dana. He didn't treat Caleb like a file. That alone made him valuable beyond his medical credentials. He reviewed the echo results from the prior week. He measured. He compared. He was quiet for long enough that Caleb's jaw tightened involuntarily. Then Dr. Reyes looked up and said, "Stable, no measurable progression since September." Caleb exhaled. Nay, it was the kind of exhale that takes weeks of accumulated pressure and releases it in under 2 seconds. His eyes went to Lily, who was sitting on the exam table drawing on the paper cover with the little crayons they kept in a cup on the counter. Completely unbothered, absolutely alive, coloring a dog that looked more like a rectangle with legs. "Still want to monitor the right ventricular wall at the next cycle," Dr. Reyes said, making a note. "But right now, she's doing well, Caleb. She's doing well." "Yeah," Caleb said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Good, okay. Good. Lily looked up from her drawing. Can we get pancakes? Yeah, Bug, Caleb said. We can get pancakes. He got her pancakes, sat across from her at the diner 2 blocks from the hospital, and watched her put entirely too much syrup on everything, and explained to him at length and with great authority that her friend Madison at school was wrong about dinosaurs, because Caleb had told her the real facts, and Madison's facts were obviously inferior. He drank his coffee and let her talk. He looked at her face, Dana's eyes, his own nose, this entirely original person who had come from the 2 of them and was now in the world, opinionated and curious and alive, needing him to stay upright and functional for at least another 15 years before she'd be ready to need him less. At 11:20, he dropped her at Mrs. Peterson's. At 11:34, he was back in his car driving toward Avum Technologies. He didn't have a plan beyond that. He hadn't prepared a speech or a list of demands. He had a solution. He'd worked it out in his head the night before while sitting in the dark beside Lily's bed running the thermal calculations with the same mental precision that never fully left him, no matter what uniform he was wearing, and he was going to give them that solution because the alternative was a product failure that would hurt real people. And Caleb Ryan was not a man who could live with a preventable harm he'd chosen to ignore, but he was also not going to walk back in there as though yesterday hadn't happened. He wasn't sure yet what he was going to say. He just knew he wasn't going to make it easy. The lobby at Avum Technologies looked exactly the same as it did every morning at 5:47 when he arrived for his shift. Same glass doors, same front desk, same security turnstile he'd swiped through with a custodial badge for 11 months. Except this time, he didn't have a badge. He stood at the front desk and said, "Isabella Monroe is expecting me. Caleb Ryan." The receptionist young woman hadn't been there before noon in 11 months of his schedule, looked at him with the specific professional blankness of someone who was not yet sure what category to file him under. She made a call, waited, made another call, glanced at him once in a way that wasn't impolite but was definitely evaluating. Then she said, "She'll be right down," and he waited in the lobby, standing. He didn't sit. Isabella Monroe came out of the elevator at 11:51. She was in the same composure she always wore, but something about it was different, like a very good painting with one stroke slightly wrong, obvious only if you knew what you were looking for. Her jaw was set, her shoulders were back, but her eyes when they found him had something in them they hadn't had yesterday morning, something that was working very hard to look like nothing. She stopped 6 feet away. Different distance than yesterday. Yesterday she'd been 4 feet close enough to be deliberate, close enough to make the point. 6 feet was a different calculation. "Thank you for coming," she said. Caleb looked at her for a moment. "Where do you want to do this?" "Yeah." She took him upstairs. Not through the lobby elevator, the executive lift which he'd cleaned, but never ridden as a passenger. The floor was different when you arrived through that door. Same physical space, different atmosphere. The engineers at their stations looked up when he walked in, and the looks on their faces were something he hadn't encountered before, and didn't particularly enjoy, a mixture of recognition and guilt that is specific to people who watched something wrong happen and didn't stop it. Trent was at his station. He caught Caleb's eye and looked immediately away. Priya was at hers. She did not look away. She looked at him steadily with an expression that was hard to read, but seemed to have something apologetic in it. Isabella led him to the main conference room. Already inside Singh, the lead thermal engineer, a woman named Hera, who ran structural analysis, and a younger engineer named Pete, who was apparently the one who'd first flagged the failure the previous afternoon. They all stood when he walked in, not formally, more the instinctive movement of people who weren't sure of the social geometry of the moment and defaulted to standing. Singh extended his hand first. "Caleb Ryan, I know your Marston work, the load distribution paper in the ASME Journal 2019. He paused. "You were the one who saw this." It wasn't quite a question. "I saw it 43 nights ago," Caleb said. He shook the hand. He sat down. On your simulation monitor, row C station 4. It was running the operating temperature thermal cycle. Singh sat down slowly. Why didn't you say something? Caleb looked at him. The kind of direct, undecorated look that requires a person to sit with the question they just asked and hear the answer in it before Caleb even opened his mouth. Singh heard it. Caleb watched him hear it, the slight change in his face, the very small recalibration that happens when a smart person realizes what they just asked and why it was a complicated question to have asked. Right, Singh said quietly. Isabella Monroe sat at the head of the table. She'd been watching this. Now she opened her laptop and turned it toward Caleb, showing him the failure simulation from yesterday, the thermal cycle playback, the joint failing at operating temperature, the progression exactly as his mental model had predicted. Walk us through what you saw, she said, and what the solution is, if there is one. The last 4 words landed with a specific weight in the room. If there is one, which meant she didn't know yet. None of them did. They'd found the problem but hadn't found the fix, which meant 12 days from launch the flagship product was on the ground, and nobody in this room, engineers with advanced degrees and years of specific experience, had a working answer. Caleb pulled the laptop toward him. He looked at the simulation for maybe 30 seconds. Then he pulled a notepad from the center of the table, found a pen, and started drawing. Not a presentation, not a PowerPoint, just a man's hand moving on paper, sketching a cross-section of the joint assembly, labeling the materials, marking the failure point. His handwriting was precise and fast, the kind that comes from years of field sketches when screens weren't available. You don't need a redesign, he said. That's what I'm guessing. You've been looking at redesign options, and they're all expensive, and they all move your timeline by months. He heard Isabella draw a slow breath at the end of the table. That breath confirmed it. What you need, he continued, is a compliant material layer, thin film copper shim or a graphite gasket. I'd recommend the graphite, better long-term thermal performance inserted between the titanium bracket face and the aluminum rail interface. It accommodates the differential thermal expansion. The joint stops accumulating stress. The system behaves exactly as your simulation predicts it should. He turned the notepad around so they could see it. Pete leaned in first, then Hara, then Singh, who picked up the notepad and held it studying it, and his face did the thing that a very good engineer's face does when it encounters a solution that is correct, the very slight involuntary relaxation, the almost imperceptible loosening of the forehead. That's it, Singh said. It's a 4-hour implementation, Caleb said. Maybe 6 with testing. You lose a day, you don't lose the launch. The room was quiet for a moment. Pete said, "How did we miss this?" Nobody answered him. Not because the answer didn't exist, but because the answer was sitting at the table with them and had a gym bag in the lobby downstairs, and had spent 11 months cleaning their floors in the early morning dark. Isabella Monroe was looking at the notepad. Her expression was something Caleb couldn't fully classify. It wasn't embarrassment exactly, though there was element of that. It was the specific look of someone who had built their identity around being the smartest person, making the right calls, and was in the process of integrating information that complicated that identity in a foundational way. She looked up from the notepad and looked at him directly. "Can you stay?" she asked. "Through the implementation, to verify." "I'm available until 3, Caleb said. "My daughter gets out of school at 3:15. The way he said it was not aggressive. It was not pointed. It was simply a fact, the kind of fact that a man with a 6-year-old states the same way an engineer states a load limit. This is real. This does not move. Isabella Monroe said, "That's fine." Singh was already on his feet, laptop in hand, moving toward the door with Hera and Pete behind him. The room had shifted into the particular focused energy of engineers who have a solution and a timeline and a problem that is now finally solvable. They were good at this part. This part was their strength. You gave them the answer and pointed them at the implementation, and they ran. Which left Caleb alone at the conference table with Isabella Monroe. She hadn't moved. She was still sitting at the head of the table, the notepad in front of her, and she was looking at it with an expression that was quiet, in a way her face hadn't been quiet once since he'd known her. Which was to say, since she'd taken his badge off his chest with 2 fingers and dropped it on the floor. He should have left. He had nothing to prove by staying in this room. He stayed anyway. "I want to explain yesterday," she started. "You don't have to." "I want to." "I know what happened yesterday," Caleb said. "You had a security flag, a classified materials protocol, and 12 days to launch. The math was easy." "That's not—" She stopped. She tried again. "That's not all it was." "I know that too." She looked at him then. Really looked, the kind of looking that doesn't categorize first. He could see her working out something, working through it, and he let her because he was a patient man and because he was curious what she'd land on. "I saw your employee file last night," she said. "Your full file, prior employment." "Okay." "You have 2 patents." "3, he said. "One's still pending." Something passed across her face. Not guilt exactly. Something older than guilt. More complicated. The specific discomfort of a person who thinks of themselves as perceptive and has discovered a significant gap between their self-image and the evidence. "Why didn't you list them?" she asked. "On your application, your engineering credentials. Why weren't they in your file?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Because I wasn't applying for an engineering job," he said. She absorbed that. "And you saw the flaw," she said. 43 nights ago, and you said nothing." "I said something once," Caleb said. "About an HVAC issue. Early on. You want to guess how that went?" She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. She knew about the formal warning in his file. He could tell by the way her jaw tightened. Caleb. It was the first time she'd used his first name. It landed differently than he expected, not familiar, not casual, just human. Just his actual name in someone's actual mouth. "I am sorry. About yesterday. About the way I handled it." He looked at her steadily. "My daughter almost lost her health insurance over an 11-second camera clip," he said. "She has a heart condition. She has a cardiologist and a prescription and a quarterly echocardiogram that costs $1,400 out of pocket without coverage." He kept his voice flat, not because he wasn't angry, he was, not because he didn't want her to feel the weight of it, he did, but because he'd learned that the truth stated plainly lands harder than the truth delivered with heat. "I've been working nights for 11 months to keep that coverage. One mistake, you said. No question, no investigation, no conversation. Just out." Isabella Monroe did not look away from him. To her credit, and he was making notes mentally on what she actually was versus what he'd assumed, she did not look away. "You're right," she said. "No defense, no qualifying clause, no but or however. Just you're right. It was a harder thing to respond to than an argument would have been." "I know," Caleb said. He stood up. "I'm going to go check in with Singh on the implementation. You should know it'll pass. The graphite layer is a documented solution for this failure mode. When they run the thermal cycle after installation, you'll have clean numbers." He picked up his pen from the table. "And Ms. Monroe," he said. He stopped at the door. Not dramatic. Not a movie moment. Just a man making sure the conversation was actually finished. When you do the post-launch review, and I recommend you do a thorough one, you might want to look at the review process that let this get to simulation without catching it. Because the flaw was in the design documentation. It should have been flagged at the material specification stage. Someone missed it. Or nobody asked the right question. A pause. The question being, what happens at the joint when these 2 metals are at operating temperature for 6 sustained hours? He left her sitting there with that. Because that was the real thing. Not the solution. Singh would run the solution, and it would work, and the launch would happen, and Avum Technologies would be fine. The real thing was the question nobody had asked for however long that design had been in development. And the reason nobody had asked it was the same reason nobody had listened when a man with a mop tried to say something important. They'd been looking at the wrong thing. They'd been looking at credentials and titles and badges and uniforms. They'd been looking at who was supposed to have the answers and assuming those were the only people capable of having them. They had not been looking at the actual system, which Caleb had learned a long time ago was how systems fail. He found Singh on the engineering floor. The graphite shim had been sourced. They had it in materials. As it turned out, they'd had it the whole time for another application, and Pete and Hera were already documenting the implementation protocol. Singh walked him through the setup. Caleb made 2 adjustments to the installation sequence, both of which Singh accepted without argument, which told Caleb something useful about Singh as an engineer and as a person. They implemented the fix at 1:17 p.m. They ran the first thermal cycle simulation at 2:03 p.m. Clean. Every metric inside tolerance. No stress accumulation at the joint. The system performed exactly as the original design specification intended. Pete actually laughed the involuntary pressure release kind of laugh that happens when a problem you've been staring at for 18 hours suddenly stops being a problem. Hara made a note without looking up. Singh leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Clean, Singh said. Run it again, Caleb said. They ran it again. Clean. By 2:40, they'd run it 4 times at different thermal load profiles, including the maximum sustained operating condition. Every run clean. The flaw was gone. The product was whole. Caleb was at the elevator at 2:51. He had 9 minutes to get to his car, beat the school traffic, and be outside Lily's school by 3:15. He would make it barely if the lights cooperated. Isabella Monroe caught him at the elevator doors. He saw her coming and pressed the button and waited. He wasn't going to miss his daughter's pickup for a conversation that could happen by phone. She reached him as the doors opened. "I want to talk about what comes next," she said. "Call me," Caleb said. He stepped in. After 3:15, she stood in the opening of the elevator doors, which meant they couldn't close, and she said, "I want to offer you a position, engineering, appropriate to your actual qualifications. Full salary, full benefits, restructured hours that work with your daughter's schedule." The elevator's door sensors registered the obstruction. It made a soft, patient sound. Caleb looked at her. "You fired me yesterday," he said. "Yes." "For picking up a folder?" "Yes." "And today you want to offer me a senior engineering role?" "I want to correct a mistake," she said. "Several of them." The elevator made its soft sound again. Caleb thought about Lily. The cardiologist, November's echocardiogram, the beta blocker prescription. Mrs. Peterson sitting up every night on her couch so he could be here cleaning floors, doing work that was worth doing, even if nobody saw it. He thought about what it would mean to be in a room like this legitimately. His name on a door, his voice in a design review, the ability to ask the question nobody had asked, what happens at this joint at operating temperature, and have people actually hear it. He thought about what it would cost him to say yes. He thought about what it would cost Lily if he said no. He put his hand on the elevator door to hold it. "I have 3 conditions," he said. Isabella Monroe said. "Tell me." 3 conditions. Caleb set his hand, still holding the elevator door open. Isabella Monroe didn't flinch. She said, "Tell me," and meant it, which was the first time since he'd met her that he believed she was actually listening rather than waiting for her turn to speak. He looked at her steadily. "First, my hours are fixed. 7 to 3 Monday through Friday. No exceptions, no emergency overrides, no, just this once. My daughter's schedule doesn't bend for a product deadline." Isabella nodded once. "Done. Second, I go back on payroll today. Not when the paperwork clears, not when HR processes the rehire today. The insurance gap gets covered retroactively from the moment you terminated me yesterday morning. If there are any medical claims that fall in that window, Avum covers them out of pocket. Something moved across Isabella's face. Not resistance, more like the expression of someone who has just been handed a bill they knew was coming and had already decided to pay. "Done," she said again. Caleb paused. This was the one that mattered most, and he wanted to say it right. "Third," he said. "I come in through the front door, same as everyone else. My badge says my name and my title. Not custodial, not consultant, engineer. And when I speak in a design review, people respond to what I said, not to what I'm wearing when I say it." The elevator doors tried to close again. He held them. Isabella Monroe looked at him for a long moment, long enough that he could see her processing it. Not the logistics, she'd already made the calculation on those, but the weight of the third condition. What it meant that he'd had to say it at all. "Done," she said, quietly, with something in her voice that had not been there yesterday morning and that he suspected cost her more than the insurance retroactive coverage. He let go of the door. "Call me after 3:15, he said, and the doors closed. He made it to the school at 3:13. 2 minutes to spare. He stood on the sidewalk outside Lily's school in the October afternoon, with his hands in his jacket pockets, and when the doors opened and the wave of children came out, he spotted her yellow rain jacket. Immediately the broken zipper won, and she spotted him and ran the way 6-year-olds run when they are genuinely glad to see someone, which is with their whole body and no self-consciousness whatsoever. She hit him at about knee height, and he caught her and picked her up, and she said, "You smell different." "Different how?" "Like the office building," she said. "The one you clean." He carried her to the car. "I might not be cleaning it anymore," he said. Lily considered this. "What will you do there instead?" "Fix things," he said. She thought about it for another moment. That sounds better, she decided. Fixing things is more interesting than cleaning things. "Yeah," Caleb said. "It is." He buckled her in. He started the car, and somewhere under the ordinary sequence of the afternoon, the drive home, the homework, the dinner he made from whatever was left in the refrigerator, he felt something shift in his chest. Not relief exactly. Something more structural than relief. The feeling of a load redistributed correctly. Weight that had been sitting wrong for 2 years, finally balanced. Isabella Monroe called at 3:47. Shushke. He was in the kitchen. Lily was at the table behind him with her math worksheet explaining to her pencil that subtraction was unfair. He stepped into the hallway. "HR will have the paperwork ready tomorrow morning," Isabella said. "Title is Senior Mechanical Design Engineer Level 3. Salary is in line with your Marston compensation. I had them pull industry benchmarks. Benefits are reinstated as of yesterday. The gap coverage is documented." A pause. "I also had legal review the termination from yesterday, and they've classified it as procedural error. Your record is clear." Caleb leaned against the hallway wall. "Okay. There's one more thing," she said. He waited. "The board is meeting Friday. I'm presenting the Q4 launch status. I'd like you there." He almost said no. The instinct was immediate and specific. The instinct of a man who had spent 2 years being invisible by necessity and had gotten very good at not being in rooms where he would be looked at. But he thought about the third condition, the front door, the badge with his name and his title, what it meant that he'd said it. "What time?" he said. 9 a.m. "I'll be there at 8:50. He went back to the kitchen. Lily had given up on subtraction and was drawing a dog on the back of her worksheet. It looked exactly like the rectangle with legs from the hospital exam table that morning. "Was that work?" she asked without looking up. "Yeah." "Are you going back?" "Yeah, Bug, I'm going back." She looked up from her drawing. She had Dana's eyes direct and clear and slightly too serious for a 6-year-old. "Is it going to be better this time?" Caleb sat down across from her. He picked up a spare crayon red and added a tail to her rectangle dog without asking permission. "I think so," he said. Lily examined the tail. "That's a good tail," she said, and went back to work. "Yes, sir." He sat there for a while. Just sat there in the kitchen with his daughter while the afternoon went dark outside the window and thought about the thermal joint. The elegant simplicity of the graphite shim. The way it had solved a complex problem, not by redesigning the entire system, but by addressing the single point where two incompatible things had been forced together without the layer they needed to coexist. He thought about that for a long time. Longer than was probably warranted for a mechanical engineering metaphor. But some metaphors are worth sitting with. The next morning, he arrived at Avum Technologies at 8:47 a.m. Front entrance. He'd worn the one dress shirt he still owned that didn't have a custodial logo on it. Dark blue, slightly too formal for a tech office, but he didn't have a middle option, and he wasn't going to show up in yesterday's clothes. He told himself the shirt was fine. It was fine. The receptionist from yesterday saw him come in. She started to reach for the call button and then stopped because this time the man in front of her was coming through the front door with the posture of someone who had been told he was expected. "Caleb Ryan," he said, "for Isabella Monroe." "She said you'd be coming." A pause. "There's a badge waiting for you at security." He walked to the security desk. The officer, not Marcus, a different one younger, slid a badge across the counter. Caleb picked it up and looked at it. Caleb Ryan, Senior Mechanical Design Engineer. He clipped it to his shirt. He had been in this building for 11 months. He had walked these hallways more times than he could count. He knew where every circuit breaker was, which bathroom on the 3rd floor had the slow drain, which coffee machine on the engineering floor made a grinding noise on the 2nd cup that everyone had learned to ignore. Walking in through the front door with that badge felt like a completely different building. He took the main elevator to the 4th floor. When the doors opened, the engineering floor was already active 8:49 a.m. The early arrivals were at their stations. He stepped out. The floor went quiet. Not dramatically, not all at once the way a room actually goes quiet when someone unexpected walks in, which is in ripples. One person looks up, then the person next to them registers the change in attention and looks, and it spreads outward. Trent was the first one to speak. He stood up from his station. Actually stood up, which Caleb had not once seen him do for anyone who wasn't Isabella Monroe or a client, and crossed the floor and extended his hand. "Trent Holloway," he said. "Thermal Systems. We've been in the same room for 11 months and I never introduced myself. That's on me." Caleb shook his hand. "I know who you are," he said, evenly. Not warm, not cold. True. Trent had the grace to look uncomfortable, which was the appropriate response. "Fair enough," he said. Priya came over next. She didn't offer a handshake. She said, "I should have said something yesterday morning, when it was happening. I didn't. I'm sorry." Direct, no decoration, no excuse attached to the apology. He respected that. He nodded. Singh appeared from the back of the floor and guided him toward the conference room where the board meeting would happen, running him through the presentation structure, on the way the launch status, the thermal issue and resolution, the timeline impact. As Singh talked, Caleb listened and noticed that Singh was describing the solution accurately and giving him full attribution without being prompted to do so. That told him something important about Singh. At 9:02, the board filed in. Janitor. 7 people, the kind of people who wore their authority like a second skin. The specific ease of people who sit at the top of rooms professionally. They took their seats. Isabella was already at the head of the table. Caleb sat to her right. This was not where he would have chosen to sit. It was where Isabella had placed his name card. He understood what she was doing. He wasn't sure yet if he appreciated it or found it slightly too neat the way some apologies are more about the person apologizing than the person they're apologizing to. He decided to let it play out. Isabella opened the presentation. She walked them through the launch status timelines, production readiness partner contracts. Clean, clear, confident. Whatever else she was good at this. The room tracked her without effort. Then she reached the thermal issue. She didn't soften it. He was prepared for her to soften it, to present it as a late-stage design refinement, or a quality review catch, the kind of corporate language that makes failures sound like features. She didn't. She laid it out plainly. A critical design flaw had been identified in the thermal joint assembly 12 days before launch. It had been resolved in a 4-hour implementation window. The launch timeline was intact. One of the board members, an older man named Greer, silver-haired, the kind of face that had asked hard questions for 40 years, and hadn't softened his delivery to match, leaned forward. How was a critical flaw missed in the review process? Isabella said, "That's a fair question and one we're actively examining. What I can tell you is how it was found." She looked at Caleb. Our senior mechanical design engineer identified the failure mode from a thermal simulation observation. His analysis pinpointed the exact failure mechanism and provided the solution. He has aerospace-level experience with this specific class of problem. Greer looked at Caleb. "What did you see?" Caleb had not been told he would be presenting to the board. He had been told he would be there. He understood now that those were different things, and that Isabella Monroe had not fully disclosed the shape of what she was asking him to walk into. He made a decision in about half a second. He could be annoyed about the setup, and he was slightly in the background, or he could answer the question because the question was a legitimate engineering question from someone who deserved a real answer. He answered it. He took 4 minutes. No slides, no props. Just the explanation, the dissimilar metals, the differential thermal expansion, the stress accumulation mechanism, the graphite shim solution, and why it worked at a materials science level. He spoke the way he thought, directly in sequence, without filler. He watched Greer tracking every word with the attention of someone who hadn't gotten to his position by letting technical explanations pass over his head. When Caleb finished, Greer was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "And how long had you been aware of this issue before it was addressed?" The room shifted. Not visibly. Nobody moved, nobody changed expression dramatically. But the air changed. The kind of change that happens when a question lands in the exact place where the truth is uncomfortable. Caleb said, 43 days. Silence. Greer said, "Why wasn't it reported?" Caleb looked at him. "I reported a different issue once in my first months here. The response was a formal warning in my personnel file for interference with engineering matters." He paused. "I was on the custodial staff at the time." Another silence, this one longer. Greer looked at Isabella Monroe. Isabella Monroe looked at the table for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked up. "Mr. Greer, those are the exact failures of process and culture that we are reviewing. What I can tell you is that we've taken immediate corrective action, including a significant personnel decision that I believe was long overdue." She didn't break the eye contact with Greer. "The right person is now in the right seat. The launch is on track, and the review of how we got here starts Monday." Greer held the look for a moment. Then he made a note. The sound of his pen on paper was the loudest thing in the room. "Monday," he said. "I'll want to see the findings within 30 days. "You'll have them in 20, Isabella said. The meeting ended at 10:34. The board filed out. Singh and Hera gathered their materials. Pete, who had been in the back corner of the room and barely visible for the entire meeting, exhaled loudly as soon as the last board member cleared the door, and Hera said "Pete" in a flat voice, and he stopped. Caleb stood. He was moving toward the door when Isabella said his name. He turned. They were alone in the conference room. Again. The second time in 2 days. He was beginning to find the pattern either meaningful or irritating and hadn't decided which. "You could have told them it was 43 days earlier," she said. "You could have told them how the warning happened. You could have made that entire meeting about what I did." "I know," Caleb said. "Why didn't you?" "Jean." He thought about how to answer that. He had a few options. He could tell her it was strategic. He could tell her it was professional. Both of those things were partially true. "Because I'm not here for that," he said finally. "I'm here because there's good work to do, And I'm good at it. And because I have a daughter who needs the insurance. He picked up his badge and looked at it for a second, Senior Mechanical Design Engineer, and clipped it back on. The past 2 days already happened, Ms. Monroe. I can't unfire me, and you can't undrop that badge. We move from here or we don't. She absorbed that. Isabella, she said. He raised an eyebrow. My name, she said. Not Ms. Monroe. We're colleagues now. The word came out slightly deliberate, like she was still getting used to the shape of it in this context. If that works for you. Caleb considered it. It works, he said. He left the conference room. He walked to the engineering floor, and Singh showed him his workstation, an actual desk with a monitor and a nameplate they'd had made up overnight. Caleb Ryan, his name in clean black letters, and Caleb sat down and opened the design file for the thermal system and started reading from the beginning. Not because he didn't already know most of it, because starting from the beginning was the only way to find everything the beginning had hidden. And he worked for 2 hours without stopping. Around him the floor operated conversations, keyboard noise, someone's phone on low vibration, the hum of the simulation servers, the ordinary sound of people doing their jobs. He'd heard this same sound for 11 months, from a different position in the same room. The sound was the same. His relationship to it was different. He was inside it now, instead of moving through it at its edges invisible. At 12:40, Pete appeared at the edge of his desk. Tentative, the body language of someone who wasn't sure if dropping by unannounced was the right move. Can I ask you something? Pete said. Yeah, the graphite shim. Pete sat down in the spare chair without being invited, which Caleb noted and didn't mind. I know why it works. I mean, I understood your explanation. But I want to know how you knew to look for it. Like the specific instinct that took you from 2 dissimilar metals to graphite shim. That's not in the textbook. That's experience. What is that? Caleb looked at him. Pete was maybe 26. Smart face. The particular intensity of someone who was genuinely asking, not making conversation. It's a failure mode called bimetallic corrosion fatigue, Caleb said. I first encountered it at Marston on an aerospace load frame. The joint failed in the field after 6 months of operation. Nobody died, but it was close. He paused. When something is close, you remember the mechanism. You remember it in your hands. Every time you see those 2 materials next to each other after that, you feel it before you think it. Pete was quiet for a moment. How do you get that, the field experience? You make mistakes, Caleb said. Or you're close enough to someone else's mistakes to learn from them. There's no other way. He looked back at his monitor. You asked a good question in there this morning, by the way. How did we miss this? Most people in that room were thinking it and didn't ask it. Pete said, nobody answered it. No, Caleb said, but they will, starting Monday. Pete nodded slowly. He stood up. He started to leave, then turned back. For what it's worth, I knew something was off with that joint. 2 weeks ago. I almost put it in a review note, and then I thought Singh had signed off on it, and who was I to... He stopped. I should have written the note. Caleb looked at him steadily. Write the note next time, he said. That's the whole thing. Write the note. Pete left. Caleb turned back to his screen. At 2:15 he found something.
Yummy.
Not the thermal joint that was resolved, verified, finished. Something else. A secondary stress concentration in the load plate geometry, subtle enough that it wouldn't cause a failure within the standard testing window, but present enough that under extended field conditions, it would eventually become a problem. Not catastrophic, not immediately dangerous, but real. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he opened a new document, wrote a precise 2-paragraph technical summary of what he'd found, documented his analysis, and sent it directly to Singh with a copy to Isabella Monroe. He did not hesitate before hitting send. Because that was the 3rd condition in practice, not just coming in the front door, not just having his name on a badge. The real third condition was this: when he saw something, he said it, and the people in this building would hear it. He got up at 2:51, put on his jacket, and walked to the elevator. Singh caught him at the door. He'd clearly just read the email. His expression was the same one from the day before, that slight, involuntary loosening that happens when a good engineer recognizes something true. "This is real," Singh said. He wasn't asking. "It's real," Caleb said. "It's not urgent. You have time to address it properly before it becomes what yesterday was, but it needs to go in the Monday review." Singh looked at him. "How many of these are in there?" Caleb thought about it honestly. "I've been through 40% of the design file. Found 2 issues in 2 hours. He held Singh's gaze. "You want to schedule some time this week to go through the rest together?" Singh said yes without pausing to think about it. Caleb nodded and walked to the elevator. He pressed the button for the ground floor. While he waited, he looked at the badge again, his name, his title, the front door and the main elevator, and a desk with a nameplate. Everything that had been absent for 11 months present now. He thought about Lily's question. Is it going to be better this time? He thought about the graphite shim. Simple, elegant, addressing the exact point of incompatibility and giving the 2 different things room to expand without destroying each other. The elevator opened. He stepped in. His phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Peterson. "Lily made me watch the same cartoon 3 times, and now I know all the words." "Everything okay?" He typed back. "Everything's okay. Be home by 3:30. The doors closed. Outside the city moved the way cities do, indifferent, continuous, full of people carrying weights that nobody else could see. A single father on an elevator going down. A badge with his real name on it. A daughter who drew rectangle dogs and asked good questions. It wasn't everything fixed. It was a start. And in Caleb Ryan's experience, a start, the right kind built on something solid, was more valuable than most people gave it credit for. The Monday review started at 9 a.m., and by 9:22, it had already become something nobody in the room had been prepared for. Caleb had been at his desk since 8:15. He'd spent the weekend going through the remaining 60% of the design file, not because anyone asked him to, but because that was who he was. He didn't half-read systems. He didn't trust partial pictures. He'd sat at his kitchen table Friday night and Saturday morning, while Lily watched cartoons, working through the documentation with a legal pad beside him, making notes in the precise shorthand he'd developed at Marston, and by Sunday evening he had a list. It was not a short list. He walked into the Monday review with Singh and Hara and Pete and 3 other engineers whose names he was still learning, and he set the legal pad on the table, and Singh looked at it and said, "How many?" 7 issues, Caleb said. 2 critical, 3 moderate, 2 cosmetic. The 2 critical ones need to be addressed before launch. The rest can be scheduled into the first maintenance cycle. The room went quiet, the way rooms go quiet when the number is larger than anyone hoped. Singh picked up the legal pad. He read the first page. His jaw tightened slightly, the involuntary response of a meticulous engineer confronting evidence that something got through his process. He passed it to Hara without speaking. Hara read it. She looked up. "When did these get in?" "That's the right question," Caleb said. "And the answer is, most of them were probably in the original design specification. They weren't introduced late. They were built in from the beginning, and nobody caught them because the review process was checking the right things in the wrong order." Pete said, "What does that mean?" "It means your review cycle validates components individually and then integrates them, which works for most failure modes. But thermal stress interaction failures, material fatigue, geometric stress, concentration, those only appear at the system level. You need the whole picture assembled before you can see them." He looked around the table. "You've been reviewing parts. You need to review the system." Singh was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that means a person is restructuring something they thought was settled. "We've been doing component review for 6 years, he said. "I know," Caleb said. And for 6 years, you haven't had a product with this thermal operating profile. This one is different. The old process doesn't fit the new problem. Another silence. This one heavier. Hera said, 2 critical issues. How long to fix them? Depends on which path you take on the second one, Caleb said. He opened his laptop. I modeled 3 approaches over the weekend. The fastest gets you done in 3 days. The most robust takes 9. The difference in long-term field performance is significant. Pete said quietly, How did you do this over a weekend? Nobody answered him. The answer was obvious to anyone who thought about it for a second, because Caleb Ryan had been in the building for 11 months and had spent that entire time watching and learning and carrying knowledge that nobody had asked him for. Isabella Monroe arrived at 9:31. She was 6 minutes late, which Caleb had already noted was unusual for her in 11 months of early morning shifts. He had never once seen her arrive after the time she was expected anywhere. She came in with her laptop and a coffee cup, and took the open seat at the head of the table and looked at the legal pad that was now making its way around the room. She read it. Her expression stayed controlled, but Caleb, who had become a close reader of Isabella Monroe's face over the past 4 days, caught the very slight tightening around her eyes. 7, she said. 2 critical, Caleb said. 3 to 9 days to resolve both depending on approach. Launch moves to the 27th at the earliest, possibly the 30th. The board presentation was based on the original launch date. I know. She looked at him. He looked back. Greer is going to ask what changed, she said. Tell him the review process changed, Caleb said. Tell him a more comprehensive system-level review identified issues that component-level validation missed. Tell him that's the new standard going forward. He paused. That's not spin. That's exactly what happened. Isabella looked at the legal pad again. Then she closed her laptop. Walk me through all 7. Dane. They spent 2 hours in that room. Caleb walked them through each issue, the mechanism, the risk profile, the resolution options, and the engineers around the table asked questions, pushed back in places, and in 3 instances, identified information that refined his analysis. This was how it was supposed to work. This was the thing that had been missing, not the knowledge any of them individually, but the combination. The system-level thinking that only happened when everybody's knowledge was in the same room, and nobody was filtering what they said based on who was listening. At 11:47, Isabella said, We go with the robust fix on both critical issues. 9 days. Launch on the 30th. Singh nodded. Hara was already writing. One more thing, Isabella said. She looked around the table. Starting immediately, every design review includes a system integration phase. Full thermal and structural modeling at operating conditions, not just component spec compliance. Caleb leads the protocol development. She looked at him. Can you have a draft framework by end of week? Thursday, he said. She nodded. Thursday. The meeting broke up at 11:53. Engineers moved toward their stations with the focused energy of people who had a problem and a plan and a deadline. The floor shifted into a different gear, productive, purposeful, running in the right direction for the first time in longer than any of them had probably realized. Caleb was gathering his notes when Trent stopped beside his desk. Get here. He hadn't spoken to Trent since the handshake on the first morning. Trent was not, he had gathered, a man who came to conversations easily. He was the kind of engineer who communicated primarily in systems and data, and found the human interface component of professional life somewhat inconvenient. Caleb recognized this type because he had some of it himself. Trent stood there for a second and then said, The load plate issue, number 4 on your list. Yeah, I saw something similar in the stress analysis 6 weeks ago. I flagged it internally to myself and decided I was probably wrong. A pause. I wasn't probably wrong. Caleb looked at him. You have that documentation. Yeah. Put it in the review file. It'll inform the resolution approach. He held Trent's gaze. And next time you see something, even if you think you're wrong, say it. The worst outcome is Singh tells you you're wrong. That's survivable. Trent looked at him for a moment. Not defensive, not grateful, just considering. The look of someone recalibrating a habit. Yeah? Trent said. Okay. He walked away. Caleb watched him go and thought about Pete's note that was never written, and Trent's flag that stayed internal, and the 43 nights of his own silence, and how many issues in how many systems were living in the gap between what people noticed and what they felt safe enough to say. That was the real problem. Not the thermal joint, not the load plate, the gap. He started working on the framework document at 1:15. He was still working on it at 2:50 when Isabella appeared at his desk. She didn't sit down. She stood with her arms crossed, which was not defensive. He'd learned that was just how she stood when she was thinking through something she hadn't finished yet. "The Greer call is at 4, she said. "I want you on it." "I have to be out of here by 3. "I know. The call is at 4. She paused. "Can you dial in from home?" He thought about Lily, homework, dinner. Mrs. Peterson, who had spent more evenings on his couch in the past 2 years than in her own living room and never once complained. "I can dial in," he said. "For 30 minutes. After that, I'm unavailable." Isabella nodded. 30 minutes is enough. She started to walk away and then stopped. This had become a pattern between them. She'd start to leave and then turn back as though the thing she actually wanted to say required the momentum of departure to get to the surface. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Go ahead." "The framework you're building? The System Integration Review Protocol." She chose her words carefully, which was itself a change from the woman who had fired him in 45 seconds 4 days ago. "Is it something that would have caught the thermal joint issue if it had been in place from the beginning?" Caleb thought about it honestly. "Yes," he said. "The first full system thermal run would have flagged the dissimilar metals interface. Probably at the 8-week design review." She absorbed that. 8 weeks in? Instead of 12 days before launch. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. He could see her doing the math, not the financial math, though that was there, but the other kind. The math of what a process failure costs when it's measured in something other than dollars. "The framework," she said. "Make it good." "I always do," he said. She almost smiled. It was a very small thing, barely visible, and it was gone before he could be sure it had been there. But it had been there. He was in his car at 3:04. Lily was in the back seat by 3:18, eating a granola bar and telling him about a disagreement she'd had with her teacher about whether penguins could theoretically learn to fly if they tried hard enough. Caleb told her the anatomical reasons why they couldn't. Lily said trying should count for something. He said she wasn't wrong about that. He dialed into the Greer call at 4:02 from the kitchen table, his laptop open. Lily doing her reading homework 3 feet away with determined concentration. Greer's voice came through the line with the same quality it had in the conference room, measured direct, the voice of a man who had learned to ask the question behind the question. "Ms. Monroe tells me the launch date has moved." "It has," Caleb said, "by 9 days. Because of additional issues found in the review. Because of a more comprehensive review process that identified issues the previous protocol wasn't designed to catch." A pause. "That's a careful way to say the same thing." "It's the accurate way," Caleb said. "The issues existed before the new review process. The new process found them. That's the distinction that matters going forward." Another pause. Longer. "Mr. Ryan." Greer's voice had shifted slightly, still direct, but with a different quality underneath it. "I've been on this board for 4 years. I've seen a lot of launch reviews. I've seen a lot of problems get managed and repositioned and carefully presented." A beat. "I want to know engineer to engineer, and I spent 15 years in structural engineering before I moved to the board side. Are we looking at a product we can stand behind?" Caleb did not hesitate. "After the 9-day resolution cycle, yes," he said. "The 2 critical issues are solvable with documented approaches. The remaining 5 issues are manageable within normal maintenance windows. The core system design is sound. What it needed was a complete look from someone without a stake in it being finished. And you're that person. I was, Caleb said. Now I have a stake in it, but the look is already done. Greer made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but had the shape of one. The sound of a person who has heard something that is both accurate and slightly ironic in a way they appreciate. 30 days, Greer said. I told Monroe I wanted the process review findings in 30 days. She said 20, Caleb said. She did. Another pause. Can she deliver? The findings, yes. The full implementation will take longer. He thought about the framework document open on his laptop. But the framework will be in place before the next design cycle starts. That's the part that changes what happens next time. Greer said, make sure it does. The call ended at 4:28. Isabella said, thank you, and the line dropped. Lily looked up from her reading. Was that important? Yeah, Caleb said. You sounded like you knew what you were talking about. I did know what I was talking about. She considered this. That's good, she said, and went back to her book. He closed the laptop. He made dinner pasta, the simple kind the one Lily ate without negotiation, unlike most other food groups. He washed dishes. He helped her with the reading homework. He gave her the beta blocker at 7:30, with a glass of water, the same as every night, the small ritual that was both ordinary and not ordinary at all, because every night it happened was a night he was grateful it was able to happen. He put her to bed at 8:15. He came back to the kitchen and opened the laptop and worked on the framework until 11:40. What he was building was not complicated in concept. In execution, it required precision, defining the integration checkpoints, the thermal modeling requirements, the materials, interaction review criteria, the documentation standards that would make it reproducible by any engineer on the team without needing Caleb Ryan specifically to run it. He was building something that would work without him. That was the point. Systems that required a specific person to function weren't systems, they were dependencies. And dependencies were fragile. He had learned that the hard way. He saved the document at 11:42 and closed the laptop. In the quiet of the kitchen in the house that had been too quiet for 2 years and was now just a house with normal quiet in it, he sat for a moment and thought about the week. 5 days ago, he had been fired in 45 seconds for picking up a folder. His badge had been dropped on a floor. He had been walked out through a loading dock. Today he had told a board member what he actually thought in plain language, and the board member had listened. He had given a framework to a CEO who had fired him and had watched her take notes. He had told a young engineer to write the note, and the engineer had nodded like someone who intended to remember it. Why? It was not redemption. He didn't think about it in those terms. It wasn't a story with a moral he'd earned. It was just the accurate outcome of a situation where the truth had eventually been louder than the assumptions people made about who could know it. He thought about Dana. He did that most nights, just a moment, not dwelling, not the full grief that had lived in him like weather for the first year after she died. Just a moment of her specifically. The way she argued. The particular quality of her attention when she was interested in something. What she would have said about this week if she could have said anything. He thought she would have said, I told you someone would eventually look. He thought she would have been right. Sorry. He went to check on Lily before he went to bed. She was asleep on her side, the beta blocker doing its quiet, invisible work in her small chest, her breathing steady and even. The rectangle dog's drawing was on her nightstand. She'd added a second dog since the hospital smaller next to the first one. He didn't know when she'd done that. He turned off the hallway light and went to bed. Thursday morning he put the framework document in Isabella's inbox at 7:58 a.m., 2 days ahead of schedule. At 8:07, she appeared at his desk. She set a printed copy of the first page on his desk. She had already made notes in the margins, not corrections additions. Places where she'd thought of an application he hadn't considered or a stakeholder communication touchpoint that the engineering framework hadn't accounted for. It was, he had to admit, useful thinking. "This is good," she said. "I know." She looked at him. That almost smile again, slightly less almost than before. "You're not modest." "I'm accurate," he said. "There's a difference." "My CFO wants to talk to you," she said, "about the cost modeling for the review cycle implementation. He has questions about resource allocation." "Tell him Thursday afternoon." "He has Thursday afternoon blocked." "Then tell him Friday morning. I have Lily's follow-up appointment Wednesday, and I'm coming in late." He said it the same way he said everything, not apologetically, not aggressively. As a fact. The way a load limit is a fact. The framework isn't going anywhere before then. Isabella looked at him for a second. Then she picked up the printed page. "I'll tell him Friday morning," she said. She went back to her office. Pete appeared at 10:15 with a question about the materials interaction section of the framework. They worked through it for 20 minutes, and at the end of it Pete said, "Can I sit in on the CFO meeting Friday? I want to understand the resource side of this." Caleb looked at him. Pete was 26, genuinely curious, and had already shown twice that he was the kind of engineer who asked the question other people were avoiding. That was valuable. That was in fact exactly what the framework was built to encourage. "Yeah," Caleb said. "Be there." At 2:30 that afternoon, Singh stopped by with something that was not a question about the framework. He sat down in the spare chair, the same one Pete always used. Caleb was beginning to think of it as the chair where people came when they had something real to say, and he was quiet for a moment in the way Singh was quiet when he was organizing something. "I've been at Avum 6 years, Singh said. "I built this thermal systems team from 4 people to 14. I have reviewed every major design that's gone out of this floor." He looked at the desk, not at Caleb at the desk. "I missed the joint, and I probably would have missed 3 of those 7 issues on your list." Caleb waited. "I'm not asking you to tell me I didn't miss them," Singh said. "I did. What I'm asking is, how do I not miss them next time? Not the framework, not the process. I mean me specifically. As an engineer, what am I not seeing that you saw?" It was one of the most honest questions anyone had asked him in years, maybe longer. Caleb thought about how to answer it in a way that was true and useful, because Singh deserved both. "You're optimizing," Caleb said finally. "You're looking at the system and asking, does this work? I'm asking, what makes this fail? Those are different questions, and they generate different attention." He paused. "At Marston, after the field failure, I told Pete about the bimetallic joint that almost hurt someone. My supervisor made us do what he called a failure-first review. You start with the assumption that the system has already failed. Then you work backward. Where did it fail? How? What was the last thing that looked fine before it didn't?" He looked at Singh. "It's uncomfortable. Because you built the system and you're proud of it, and starting from failure feels like assuming the worst about your own work. But it finds things that success first review doesn't." Singh was quiet for a long moment. "Failure first review," he said. "It's in the framework, section 4. Singh picked up the printed framework copy from the edge of the desk. Apparently everyone had printed it, and found section 4 and read it. He read it slowly, which meant he was reading it the right way. "I want to run a failure-first session on the current system before the launch," he said. "This week. Will you lead it?" Caleb thought about the schedule. The CFO meeting Friday. The follow-up items from the Monday review. The 2 critical issue resolution timelines that Pete and Hera were managing. "Wednesday afternoon," he said. "After my late start." "Wednesday afternoon," Singh said. He stood up. He extended his hand across the desk. Caleb shook it. And it was different from the first handshake 5 days ago when Singh had been performing an acknowledgement. This one was specific. This was one engineer to another across a desk on the floor they both worked on, with a shared problem and a shared language, and the particular respect that forms between people who have looked at a hard thing together and neither one flinched. Singh left. Caleb turned back to his screen. At 2:58, before he packed up to get Lily, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. He opened it. It read, "Saw your name in the Avum press release draft. Senior Mechanical Design Engineer. Thought I recognized it. This is Joel Holt, your old manager at Marston. Glad to see you landed right. If you ever want to talk, call me." Caleb read it twice. Joel Holt. The man who had sat across from him in a conference room and said with genuine pain in his face, "This position doesn't bend." He set the phone down. He looked at it for a moment. Then he picked it up and typed back, "I'll call you Friday. Good to hear from you, Joel." He put his jacket on. He picked up his bag. He clipped his badge to his jacket. Caleb Ryan, Senior Mechanical Design Engineer, and walked to the elevator. The floor was running at full speed behind him. Singh was at his station. Pete was in a side conference room with Hara working through the resolution protocol. Trent was at his desk with the documentation Caleb had told him to file, apparently actually filing it. The simulation servers hummed. The monitors ran. The system worked. Not perfectly. Systems never worked perfectly. There was always another issue, another gap, another question nobody had asked yet. That was not a failure. That was the nature of systems and the nature of the work, and the reason the work never actually ended. But it was running in the right direction. And the man who had spent 11 months cleaning its floors in the dark, who had seen its flaws and carried the knowledge alone and been thrown out for touching a folder, was now the person building the process that would keep it honest. He pressed the button for the ground floor. The doors opened. He walked out through the front. Joel Holt called first. That was the thing about Friday morning. Caleb had planned to call Holt, had the number pulled up on his phone while he was making Lily's breakfast, and then his screen lit up with Holt's name before he could dial. 7:43 a.m. Holt had always been an early starter. "Caleb." The voice was the same. Warm, direct, with that particular quality of a man who felt things and didn't apologize for it. "I wasn't sure you'd want to hear from me." "I texted you back," Caleb said. "You did. I wasn't sure what that meant." Caleb poured coffee. Lily was at the table behind him eating cereal and reading the back of the cereal box with the focused attention she gave everything printed. "It meant call me Friday," he said. "What did you think it meant?" A pause. Then Holt laughed, a short, genuine sound. "Fair enough." Another pause, this one with weight in it. "I heard about what happened at Avum. The whole story. Not the press release version, the real version. Marcus, the security chief, his cousin works at Marston. Word travels." "Word always travels," Caleb said. "How are you doing actually?" Caleb thought about the honest answer. Not the polished one, not the professional one, the actual one. "Better than 2 weeks ago," he said, "which was worse than I let on to anyone." "I know," Holt said quietly. "Caleb, what I said to you 2 years ago, that this position doesn't bend." He stopped, started again. "I've thought about that conversation more times than is comfortable. You were the best engineer on my team, maybe the best I've worked with in 20 years. And I sat there and told you the job didn't bend." "It didn't," Caleb said. "That was true. True doesn't make it right." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Lily had finished the cereal box and was now looking at him with the patient expression of a 6-year-old who knows a conversation is almost over and breakfast is not. "Joel," Caleb said, "I have to get my daughter to school. Can I call you this afternoon?" "Of course, but I want to say one more thing before you go." Holt's voice shifted, the tone of a man who has practiced something and is finally delivering it. "Marston has a structural systems division now. New program, aerospace adjacent flexible scheduling, built into the contract because we lost 3 good engineers to exactly what happened with you, and I told the director that was unacceptable." A beat. The director listened. I want you to know the door is open if you ever want to walk back through it. Caleb stood in the kitchen with the coffee cup in his hand and felt the specific gravity of that sentence landing. I'll call you this afternoon, he said. I mean it. He dropped Lily at school at 8:31. She was wearing the yellow rain jacket with the broken zipper and had her backpack on one shoulder and was already thinking about something else by the time she hit the school doors, which was how it should be. That was what you wanted a kid who walked into school with her mind already running forward. He watched her until she was inside. He sat in the car for 2 minutes. Then he drove to Avon. The CFO meeting was at 9 a.m. His name was Warren Briggs, late 50s, the kind of man who had survived 20 years of corporate finance by being simultaneously pleasant and immovable. He shook Caleb's hand and offered coffee, and then immediately got to the part where he told Caleb in careful and thoroughly decorated language that the cost of implementing a full system integration review cycle into every design process was significant, and that the board would need to see a return on investment model before approving the framework as standard protocol. Caleb looked at him. Pete, sitting to Caleb's left, looked at his notebook. Mr. Briggs, Caleb said, what did the thermal joint failure cost? Briggs blinked. The 9-day delay. Not the delay, the failure. The moment the system failed in simulation 12 days before launch. What did that cost in engineering hours, in consultant fees, in legal review, in the board communication, in the production schedule disruption? He paused. And what would it have cost if it had failed in the field after launch, in the hands of a customer? Briggs was quiet. Briggs was, that number, Caleb said, is the ROI model. The cost of the review process is the cost of not having that conversation after something breaks. It's cheaper before. He let that sit for a second. It's always cheaper before. Pete wrote something in his notebook. Caleb could see from the angle that he'd written exactly what Caleb had just said word for word. Briggs looked at his own notes for a moment. The pleasant immovability shifted slightly. I'll need the framework document and a projected cost breakdown by Wednesday, he said. You'll have it Monday, Caleb said. Pete will deliver it. Pete looked up. Caleb looked at him steadily. Pete closed his notebook and said, Monday, yes. They were out of the meeting at 9:34. In the hallway, Pete said, I've never built a cost breakdown model. I know, Caleb said. Singh can help you with the engineering cost components. Briggs's own assistant can give you the template they use for board submissions. Just ask her, she'll send it. You have all the information you need. You just have to put it in the right order. Pete stared at him. Why are you giving this to me? No. Caleb stopped walking. He turned and looked at Pete directly. Because in 3 years, if you stay in this building and keep asking the questions you're asking, you're going to be leading design reviews. And the only way you learn how a system works is to build one yourself. He paused. Write the note, Pete. Pete stood there for a moment. Then he nodded the slow, settled kind of nod that means a person has received something they intend to keep. The failure first review session ran Wednesday afternoon from 1:30 to 4:15. 8 engineers in the main conference room. The full design file on the main screen, and Caleb running the session the way his old supervisor at Marston had run them, starting from the assumption of failure and working backward through the system with the specific uncomfortable question, where did it break and why did it look fine before it didn't? It was the most productive 3 hours the engineering floor had run since Caleb had started working there. Not because of anything dramatic, no single revelation, no moment of sudden breakthrough. Just 8 people in a room, all pointing their attention in the same direction, using a framework that gave them permission to say the thing they'd been self-editing before asking it. Trent found something in the second hour. A fatigue point in the load plate geometry different from the one Caleb had identified, a companion issue that interacted with it under specific load conditions. He found it because the failure-first framing gave him the framework to articulate what he'd been sensing for 6 weeks without the vocabulary to say it clearly. Why? When he laid it out, The room went quiet for exactly the kind of moment that Caleb had spent 11 months wishing he could participate in, the moment where a real thing is seen by the right people at the right time. Singh said, "Trent, that's a real finding." Trent said, "Yeah, I know." And he looked at Caleb with an expression that was not gratitude exactly, but was in the neighborhood of it. Caleb made a note and kept going. By the end of the session, they had 3 additional items for the review list, none critical, all manageable, all findable, only because they'd started from failure instead of success. When the last engineer filed out, Isabella was standing in the doorway. Caleb hadn't known she was there. He didn't know how long she'd been watching. "How did it go?" she said. 3 new items, none critical. He was packing up his notes. "They're all in the documentation file." She walked in. She sat down at the table, which meant this was not a hallway conversation. He waited. "I had a call this morning," she said. "From Greer." Caleb sat. He reviewed the framework document. He wants it presented at the next board meeting as a formal protocol proposal. Permanent adoption across all Avum product lines. She looked at him evenly. He also said, and I'm quoting directly here, that it was the clearest engineering risk management framework he'd seen in 15 years of board work. Caleb said nothing. "He asked who built it," Isabella said. "What did you tell him?" "I told him it was built by our senior mechanical design engineer." She paused. "He asked how long you'd been with the company." Another pause. "I told him 11 months, she said. The weight of that landed between them on the conference table. All of what 11 months contained: the mop and the cart and the early morning darkness and the formal warning in his personnel file and the badge dropped on a floor and a folder picked up in good faith. All of it compressed into 2 words that said something true and didn't say nearly enough. "What did he say?" Caleb asked. "He said we should have been using you differently from the start." She met his eyes. "He's right." Caleb looked at her. He thought about saying something that would let her off the hook, the way people sometimes do in uncomfortable moments, something that redistributed the weight a little more gently. He decided not to. "Yes," he said. "You should have." She didn't look away. "I know." They sat with that for a moment. Not uncomfortably, just honestly. Then Isabella said, "I want to offer you a revised title, Principal Engineer Systems Integrity. It's a new role. I'm creating it specifically because it didn't exist, and it should have. You'd have formal authority over the design review process, a direct report line to me, and a seat at the product development table from concept phase forward." She slid a folder across the table. "Compensation is in there. The hour structure stays as agreed." Caleb opened the folder. He looked at the number. He looked at it again because the first look hadn't fully processed it. Man. It was not what he had made at Marston. It was more than what he'd made at Marston. Significantly more. The kind of number that changes the calculation on Lily's medical costs from a constant low-level anxiety to a manageable line item. The kind of number that means Mrs. Peterson doesn't have to sleep on his couch anymore because he can afford actual childcare backup. The kind of number that means the November echocardiogram and every echocardiogram after it is covered fully, without the math he'd been running in his head every month for 2 years. He closed the folder. "I need to think about it," he said. Isabella blinked. She had not expected that. He could see it, the very slight disruption in her composure, the fractional recalibration of someone who had walked into a room expecting a yes. "Of course," she said, carefully. "I have another conversation I need to have first," he said. "Give me until tomorrow morning." He thought about Joel Holt, about the call he was going to make this afternoon, about the Marston Structural Systems Division with flexible scheduling built in by a director who had listened, about the fact that 2 doors were open simultaneously and walking through one meant closing the other, and he was not a man who made that kind of decision without sleeping on it. Isabella nodded. "Tomorrow morning," she said. He called Holt from the parking structure at 3:02 before he started the car. Holt answered on the second ring. Caleb told him about the offer, all of it, the title, the role, the compensation, the authority. He told it plainly without strategy because Holt had earned plainness. Holt was quiet for a moment. "That's a serious offer," he said. "It is." "And you're calling me?" "I said I would." Matty, another pause. "Caleb, the Marston position, it's real, and I meant every word I said this morning. But I'm not going to tell you to walk away from what Isabella Monroe is offering you." His voice was careful and honest. "What she's building for you there, the principal role, the system's authority, the seat at the table from concept forward, that's not something I can match right now. Maybe in 2 years when the new program is fully funded. Not now." Caleb looked at the parking structure ceiling. "Then why tell me about it?" he said. "Because I owed you the option," Holt said simply. "You deserve to know the door was open. What you do with that is yours." A beat. "But if you're asking me, don't leave a building where you just rebuilt the entire engineering culture in 2 weeks. That's rare, and it matters." Caleb sat with that. "I'll call you next week," he said. "Not about the job, just to talk." "I'd like that," Holt said. He picked Lily up at 3:18. She was in the yellow jacket talking to her friend Madison about something with great intensity, and she broke off mid-sentence when she saw him and ran the way she always ran, full body, no self-consciousness. And he caught her, and she said, "Madison says her dad knows everything. I told her my dad knows more." "That's not necessarily true," Caleb said. "I know," Lily said cheerfully. "But it sounded good." He laughed. Actually laughed the full kind, the kind that had been infrequent enough in the past 2 years that he noticed it when it happened. He buckled her in and drove home and made dinner and helped with homework and gave her the beta blocker at 7:30 and put her to bed at 8:15 and then sat at the kitchen table with the folder Isabella had given him and a cup of coffee and thought about it for a long time. He thought about Marston and what he'd lost when he left it. He thought about Avon and what he'd found when he'd been thrown out of it. He thought about 11 months of darkness and early mornings, and the particular loneliness of being invisible in a room full of people doing work you understood better than they did. He thought about Pete writing something in a notebook, word for word. About Trent filing the documentation he'd sat on for 6 weeks. About Singh running a failure-first review and finding things he'd missed. About a floor of engineers beginning slowly to ask better questions because the framework gave them permission to. He thought about what it meant to build something that worked without you. Specifically a system that ran because the process was right, not because the right person happened to be in the room. He thought about Lily's question, the one she'd asked on the first day. "Is it going to be better this time?" He opened the folder again. He looked at the number again. He picked up his pen and wrote 3 words on the inside cover of the folder, the way he always marked a decision he'd made and didn't intend to revisit. He closed it. He went to bed. At 8:49 the next morning, he walked through the front entrance of Avum Technologies, through the lobby, past the security desk, where the officer nodded at his badge, and up the main elevator to the 4th floor. Isabella was already in her office. She saw him come in through the glass wall. She watched him cross the floor without coming out, giving him the space. He noted that the way he noted everything, it was a small thing, and it was not nothing. He knocked on the open door. She said, "Come in." He sat down across from her. He set the folder on her desk. She looked at it, at his face, back at the folder. "Well," she said. "I have a 4th condition," he said. She waited. "The framework becomes company policy before I sign anything. Board approval, formal documentation, standard protocol across every product line. Not a pilot program, not a trial period. Policy." He looked at her steadily. Because if I leave in 2 years for any reason, the process stays. The building doesn't go back to component-only review because the person who built the other way is gone. Isabella looked at him for a long moment. You're thinking about what happens after you, she said. I'm always thinking about what happens after, he said. That's how you build something that lasts. She picked up the folder. She opened it to the inside cover and saw the 3 words he'd written. She read them. She looked up. The 3 words were, I'll take it.
Won't.
Something moved across Isabella Monroe's face that Caleb had not seen there before in 2 weeks of watching her. Not the almost smile. Something older than that. Something that looked, if he was reading it right, like genuine relief, the kind that doesn't come from a problem being solved but from a person recognizing that they have finally done something right. The framework goes to the board for formal adoption next week, she said. I'll have legal draft the policy language by Monday. Good, he said. She extended her hand across the desk. He shook it. It was different from the handshake with Singh, which had been engineer to engineer. This one was 2 people who had started in the worst possible position relative to each other, and had navigated imperfectly and honestly to a place where they could sit across a desk and mean the gesture. He went to his workstation. He opened the design file for the next product in development, a thermal management system for industrial applications, early concept phase, exactly where the framework was designed to start. He read the first section. He found something in 40 minutes. Wow. Not critical, not urgent. A material selection note in the specification that would have caused a minor thermal efficiency loss under sustained load, the kind of thing that wouldn't fail a product, but would eventually disappoint a customer and cost the company in warranty service. He documented it. Clear, precise 2 paragraphs. He sent it to Singh with a note first finding on the new product concept phase framework working as designed, and Singh replied in 4 minutes, 3 words exactly as intended. At 12:30, Pete came by the desk. He set a folder down without speaking the cost breakdown model for the CFO completed formatted clean. Caleb opened it and read the first page, and then the second, and then looked up. This is good, he said. Pete said Singh helped with the engineering cost components. Briggs's assistant gave me the template. He paused. I just put it in the right order. Sorry. Caleb looked at him. There was something in Pete's face that hadn't been there 2 weeks ago, a small specific confidence, not arrogance. The quieter thing. The thing that comes from doing a task you weren't sure you could do, and discovering that you could. Monday to Briggs, Caleb said. Monday to Briggs. Pete confirmed and walked away. At 2:45, Dr. Reyes called. Caleb stepped into the empty side conference room and answered. I wanted to let you know the insurance confirmation came through, Reyes said. The retroactive coverage is processed. The November echocardiogram is scheduled and fully covered. A pause. Everything looks good on our end, Caleb. Lily's doing well. Caleb stood in the empty conference room with the phone against his ear and did not say anything for a moment because the specific combination of those sentences, retroactive coverage processed, November scheduled, Lily's doing well, was more than he'd been able to say. Was true. Simultaneously for a very long time. And the feeling that came with it was not dramatic, but it was deep. The way relief is deep when it arrives after you've been holding something heavy for long enough that you'd almost forgotten the weight. Thank you, doctor, he said. See you in November, Reyes said. He stood there for another minute after the call ended. Just stood there, letting it settle. Then he went back to his desk and kept working. At 3:01 he packed up. He put on his jacket. He clipped his badge to his chest. He looked at it once. Caleb Ryan, Principal Engineer Systems Integrity. The new title Isabella had already had updated that morning, the same clean letters his actual name, and he walked to the elevator. Isabella was coming out of her office when he passed. She saw him heading out. Early, she said. 3 o'clock, he said. Every day. She nodded. No negotiation. No hesitation. Done. The elevator opened. He stepped in. Singh was at the end of the floor. He raised a hand, not a wave exactly, more an acknowledgement. The specific gesture that means, I see you. We're in this together, keep going. Caleb returned it. The doors closed. He picked Lily up at 3:17. She came out of school talking about a science project on weather patterns. And by the time they reached the car, she had pivoted to asking whether it was possible to train a cloud, which led to a 20-minute conversation on the difference between physics and possibility that Caleb took seriously because Lily's questions always deserved seriousness. What? He made dinner. He helped with the weather project. He gave her the beta blocker at 7:30. He read to her from the book she was working, through a chapter book about a girl who builds robots which Lily was deeply invested in, and which Caleb suspected was influencing her career trajectory away from meteorology and back toward engineering, though she hadn't confirmed this officially. He put her to bed at 8:15. He sat in the kitchen in the quiet of the house and thought about nothing complicated for a few minutes. Just sat. The house was not too quiet anymore. It was the right kind of quiet, the temporary kind, the kind that exists between things rather than instead of them. He thought about Donna. Her eyes in Lily's face. The way the rectangle dog drawing on the nightstand now had two dogs in it, the first one big, the second one smaller side by side. He hadn't asked Lily what the second dog was. He thought he knew. He thought about a badge dropped on a floor. 2 fingers. A deliberate release. The way humiliation feels when it is public and undeserved, and you have no platform from which to respond to it, except the long platform of what comes after. Why? He thought about what comes after. This was what comes after. A floor of engineers asking better questions. A framework that would outlast him. A 6-year-old with steady lungs and a growing collection of rectangle dogs. A name on a badge that said exactly who he was. The front door every morning because that was the condition, and the condition held. Not vindication, not a dramatic reversal of fortune, just the accurate outcome of a man who knew what he knew and refused to let it stay invisible forever, who had been quiet when he had to be quiet, and had spoken clearly when the moment gave him the ground to stand on, and had done the work with the same precision and care, regardless of what uniform he was wearing while he did it. That was the whole thing. That was all of it. Caleb. Ryan turned off the kitchen light, checked on his daughter, one last time, breathing steady. Rectangle dogs on the nightstand, the beta blocker doing its quiet work, and went to bed. In the morning, he would walk through the front door. He would find the next thing nobody had looked at yet, and he would say so.